Hello friends. For today's video, I wanted to do the first of 4 different Goodreads themed videos, and I just want to say really quick a big thank you for being really understanding as to why these are coming a little bit later than I typically like to do them. If you didn't see my community tab post, my grandmother passed away the day that the nominees were announced. I had planned on filming a bunch that day, but I just didn't really have it in me. I was sad. I'm still sad, but I just didn't, I wasn't, I'm sure you understand. So I don't need to elaborate on that. But thank you. I know this is a little bit been there, done that. It feels like everybody's probably already talked about the nominees and there's not a whole lot left to say. So if you're here, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I would love to know your thoughts for the various different topics that I'll be going through. The one for today is going to be called Goodreads And Me Disagree. That's how I have it in my notes, which are just some books I was surprised to see on the nominations. And a couple of them I'm not surprised at all, but they just weren't ones that worked for me, or I DNF'd them, or I was seeing a lot of almost negativity around these. Maybe not negativity, but more less glowing reviews, I should say. So they kind of took me aback. A few of them, I just have some personal things I wanted to mention, as well as a topic that I'd like to throw out there and see what you think. I also wanted to do Goodreads and Me Agree, which is some nominations that I was so happy to see on the list that I think really deserve to be there. And then we'll get into some Goodreads snubs, as well as Goodreads snubs that don't make sense, which I know that seems a little bit like an oxymoron, but I promise when we get around to that video, I will elaborate. But focusing today on Goodreads and Me Disagree, I'm going to start with the general topic that I was a little bit bummed about, which is that it would seem there are no longer some middle grade books that are going to be there. You're not going to have that as one of the categories that you can vote within. I will elaborate on the romantasy category in Goodreads and Me Agree because I know a lot of us were hoping for that, so we'll get around to that one in the next video. But the reason the middle grade one makes me sad, there's a few different reasons, is that I find that this would be such a fun thing for parents who have children who really enjoy reading, or maybe their child likes to read here and there, and the parent is kind of looking at what are some books that maybe they'd be interested in. And so it could be a great resource for parents or guardians, caretakers. And I could also see it being really helpful to librarians and teachers, just knowing what books are popular. I'm sure a lot of librarians and teachers already know, but it's just an additional resource that could be helpful. I know that if I had a child and they really like to read, I would probably set up a Goodreads account with them and kind of sit with them whenever they wanted to update their reading, whenever they wanted to see, I really liked this book, what other books are like this. And I think it would be a really fun activity to do as a parent with a child. And then when the nominees come around, how exciting would that be if your child's read a lot of the books and they get to see the nominations and they get to vote? I just think that would be so much fun, and I'm sad that that opportunity is not there. I don't know if there are any parents that did anything like that with their kids, or if this is a non-issue and it's not a bummer to anyone else, but I was a little sad to see the middle grade category go. I know comics, graphic novels, I believe that one also isn't there anymore. That one also is a little disappointing, although it's not surprising. I find that a lot of people who are, this is speaking generally, this isn't true for everyone, but a lot of people who are really into comics, I don't know that the comics that get nominated on the Goodreads Awards are the ones that comic book people tend to be picking up. It always seems really random and more YA specific or more mainstream as opposed to the things that the niche is actually looking at, or I'm trying to avoid saying like the real fans, but I think you know what I mean. People that aren't necessarily just dipping their toes in comics, the ones that read all the time. I think as fantasy fans, which I know a lot of you are, you can relate to what I'm trying to say, because I know a lot of fantasy fans have had that feeling of the fantasy nominations sometimes feel like beginner fantasy. I don't even like that term sometimes, but they feel like, again, more mainstream. Like these can technically maybe fit in the fiction section. They're less what the fantasy fans want, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, because I think part of what makes the Goodreads nominations great is it highlights books that maybe some of us that are really stuck in our niches wouldn't have seen otherwise. But getting back to the point about graphic novels, I don't know if comic book people are all that bummed about it, because I don't think they were really that interested in the Goodreads nominees anyway. I could be wrong. If you are a big comic book person, you are, of course, welcome to elaborate, because you would know more than me. But that one I was like, well, I wish it was there, but at the same time, I don't know, maybe this makes things run smoother. So anyway, those are the two bigger category type things that I was a little disappointed by. I am in disagreement. I do wish definitely the middle grade should be there, and then I would like if the comics would return. The last thing I'll say is, at least for the middle grade category, as somebody who doesn't typically keep up with middle grade, I actually did like using the Goodreads nominees to see, what middle grade books have been coming out, because I'm a little out of the loop. So for my own personal reasons, I also am sad it's gone. Now getting into some books that I was surprised by. They're books I maybe DNF'd or something like that. And the first one is going to be Witch King by Martha Wells. I really liked the beginning of this, and I was so intrigued. And then the further I read, the less interested I got, because it just felt like the more sort of convoluted the plot became, it just felt like the intrigue I had been given at the beginning was starting to drag on almost for too long, and I was waiting to finally feel like, okay, now I sort of have an idea, everything's starting to click. And I didn't really have that moment. Of course, if I had kept reading, I'm sure I would have had that moment at some point. But it would seem a lot of people, after I DNF'd it, I was looking at what other people say about this. Does it get good? Should I push through? And it seemed to be a general frustration for a lot of people that they just feel it wasn't elaborated on enough, that the plot, the characters, they just never really felt all that connected to things or felt invested or like they really understood everything as well as they would have liked, even by the end. And seeing that, I was thinking, this is one of those books that I think a lot of people, when it was on their anticipated releases, would have expected and predicted at the end of the year that it would have shown up. But since it hasn't gotten as much praise, now it's probably not going to be on there, because there's been some other fantasy books that have popped up that have really taken people by surprise. And then Witch King was still there. So I'm just kind of surprised that Witch King was on the list. I don't think it's... I just was surprised, because it didn't seem like something even Martha Wells fans were as taken with. After that, we have, okay, so The Foxglove King. I enjoyed this one. I thought that the world building was the coolest part. The characters annoyed me a little bit. The relationship building annoyed me a little bit, but I enjoyed the plot. And I actually felt like for a fantasy story, the more disturbing elements and horror-leaning elements were legitimately scary. There were a couple of scenes that I was actually pretty creeped out by. So I liked the aesthetic of it. The thing I disagree with is not that it's a nominee, but where it's placed. And I have a feeling this is going to be, and this is a thing I predicted would happen before, now that we do have a romantasy category, I think a new thing that's going to be a frustration is books that sort of straddle the line between just being fantasy and being fantasy romance getting placed in a spot that people don't feel like it belongs. There's certain books that feel very definitively, you go in this category or you go in this category, but Foxglove King was nominated for romantasy, and I disagreed with that. I did not think that the book felt like a fantasy romance. Did it have a prevalent romantic plotline? Yes. I wouldn't say, though, that it was a driving force in the main plot necessarily. Like, it was tied to it. It got a lot of screen time, but it felt like it was developing alongside the main plot as opposed to being the main plot, which I think with a lot of the other fantasy romance books, the thing that really is pulling people in is the romance, and it's just set in a fantasy world, which is a very basic way to describe fantasy romance. I know there's more to it, but I just didn't think Foxglove King felt like fantasy romance. And maybe part of the problem is I have too narrow of a view in my mind of what fantasy romance is, so maybe this is a me thing, but I just wouldn't have expected it there. Maybe it's also that the people who would be interested in it, they're placing it where they feel that its demographic is. Maybe they don't feel like this is as much a fantasy book reader kind of book, and maybe they feel it's more of a fantasy romance reader kind of book. Anyway, the next one, I mean, I knew Fourth Wing was going to be there, and I'm glad it's in the romantasy section. I just didn't love Fourth Wing, so, it's fine that it's there. I don't, I'm glad for everybody that loved it that it was there. I'm sure it'll win. I just don't think it's the best that fantasy romance has to offer. I was surprised that Iron Gold, no, that's not, Iron Gold's a Red Rising book, Iron Flame. I was unsure whether it was also going to be placed, because it did get released within the window of eligibility. It's not there, though. I would have found that really interesting to see it pull votes from Fourth Wing. But you all know, I didn't love Fourth Wing. The Hurricane Wars, I picked this up. I mentioned in a book haul that I had just started it and I wasn't loving it initially, but I would give it some time, and I DNF'd it. Its writing style just really wasn't for me. It was maybe a little too descriptive and not in the traditional way. And when I say traditional way, I'm referring to in fantasy, there is a tendency to over-describe sometimes. And this one, it was more of like the use of adjectives felt a little excessive. So it was to a point where it was actually becoming kind of distracting. And I was just not invested. I was thinking pretty early on, I don't think that this writing style is going to be very appealing to me. But other people have really been loving this one. I more so wanted to mention this one because you're not really going to see me talk about it. So if it is one that you're interested in, then you have that heads up like, oh, I don't know that much about this one. It's romantasy. Maybe I would like it. The Yasad Heir is another one that I DNF'd. I'm kind of surprised to see this on the list for similar reasons to Witch King, where I DNF'd it, but then I was talking to some friends who did finish it, and the feeling that I had at the beginning of the book, they felt throughout, and by the end, they didn't really find that their feelings were changing all that much. So I think I was surprised, too, to see this one on fantasy romance, because what I'd heard of it did not sound like it was as romantically driven as the other fantasy romance books. So it's kind of a mix of what I was saying about Witch King and what I was saying about Foxglove King. The last book that I want to touch on is the only one that's not fantasy or fantasy romance, and that would be Happy Place by Emily Henry. This is a just romance book, not romantasy or anything like that. So I enjoyed Happy Place. I know a lot of people were very frustrated by the lack of communication in that book, which is completely fair. I know a lot of us hate that. I enjoyed the book. I enjoy Emily Henry's books in general, but I don't think that this is the best of Emily Henry. And to me, it just feels like it's Emily Henry. That's why it's there. The same way you see if Sarah J. Maas has a book out, it's going to be on the list. Those sorts of things. This one, it kind of, to me, fell into that. I don't know that I think it's her best work. I still think that it has two different names. People We Meet on Vacation, and it's got a different name in the US versus the UK. But that one to me is still the best one. I think Book Lovers is next. And then I thought the one, the beach read, I was gonna say Beach House. I mean, it's not called Beach House. That one is not, in my opinion, as good as the others. Anyway, this isn't a video about Emily Henry. This is just me saying that Happy Place to me is not quite in the same category as People We Meet on Vacation. That one I think was very, very good. I still enjoyed it. I still liked a lot of the themes that she put into the book. It would be nice if books weren't just immediately on there because fill in the blank popular author wrote it. We know that's how it's going to be. That's how it always is. Because they're, at the end of the day, they're popularity contests. And that's fine. I don't have an issue saying that, admitting that, and we all know that. I just wish that just because something was popular did not necessarily immediately put it on the list, which it always does. So that's it for some Goodreads and Me Disagree. Like I said, I will be getting into ones that I was definitely really happy to see on the Goodreads nominations, and then we'll get into some snubs, which those will be a little bit more recommendation style. But let me know your thoughts on the Goodreads nominees. By the time all these videos go up, I think December 7th is when the winners are announced, so maybe this will all be old news and nobody will care. But I still would be curious to know your thoughts about all of this. Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.